when are you going to move on? When, like, at some point you have to forgive. And I was thinking, like, okay, but we never processed it. Like, what the hell?
In my head.
It's the day I do everything. It's that day. It's not too bad today. I don't feel as depressed as I normally do. And I did want to say, because I use the word depressed a lot here, when I say depressed, I mean, I don't want it to sound like I'm dismissing the people who have major depressive disorder or persistent depressive disorder. Depression is just a state of, at least the way that I'm using the word, it's just a state of feeling unmotivated, feeling like groggy, feeling like you just can't do things that you want to. It's not sadness, and I want to make a distinction here between depression and sadness. That sadness is when you feel kind of down about something, you feel disappointed. That's the way that I define these terms. So I make the distinction that I'm feeling depressed and that I'm unmotivated. I don't want to do things. I feel like I'm not able to do things. My body feels heavy. Those kinds of things are what I'm talking about when I say depression. So that's not to discount the people who have major depressive disorder or dysthymia or any of the other depressive disorders. Okay, that out of the way, I'm not feeling so depressed today. I'm feeling okay about the fact that I have to do all this stuff today. And I would like to continue on with the topic of therapy, specifically couples therapy, because this is what I was talking about in the last video. And I think it's kind of exciting. I think there's a lot to explore here because I have some interesting personal experience with couples therapy, and I'd like to learn maybe a little bit about your experience. So we'll discuss mine, and then at the end I'll kind of ask you about yours. So I got into couples therapy with my last relationship, and actually, you know what, I want to make sure I get the timeline right here, and I actually have a timeline of my last relationship because as it ended, I was just scrambling to try to figure out what the heck was going on here. Why is my life falling apart and falling to shit? That's what I wanted to understand, so I put a timeline together to grasp it. And so if you're somebody who's gotten out of a relationship and you put together a timeline, you are not alone. I am right there with you, and I'm going to take a moment and look at my timeline before I move on to the next video. Here I am again talking about topics that I would rather have the privacy to talk about, that I don't have to talk about them, so I'm in public, uncomfortable, but we're going to go ahead and do it. So I looked up my relationship timeline for the past relationship that I was in. Again, I created this timeline because, for a lot of reasons actually, because I didn't understand what was going on, why we were at the point that we were at in our relationship. This was at the very end when we were breaking up. And because I had suffered from PTSD, and part of my PTSD was dissociating a lot and having a lot of these gaps in my memory and not really understanding everything that was going on. So the timeline helped me keep everything in line, keep everything in order, and understand comprehensively what was going on. So to the therapy, which is what I would like to talk about. We first got into therapy. It was 3 years into our relationship when I had found out that 2.5 years into our relationship, my ex had created, he got into cheating on me, let's put it that way. He was contacting people, meeting them, and there was definitely sexual relations going on. I have proof of that. That's not contestable. And I say this because I don't know who's watching. There's people who I'm still in contact with who may be watching my YouTube videos. If you are, hello. You can talk to me about any of these things if that's your desire. But so he was cheating on me, and I found out, and I waited a day to process it because that's a crazy blow to your whole world when you find out that's going on, because I didn't have any reason to believe that this was going on. It just kind of happened upon it. So I found out, I took a day to process it and decide, okay, what am I going to do about this? And I had been meditating at the time, so I had the ability to be clear in my thoughts and I made a clear decision that if he was willing to go to therapy, then I was willing to try to figure out why he did this, what was going on, and see what we could do about salvaging the relationship. Oh, this is so uncomfortable with all these people like driving around and walking past. Okay, so I confronted him. I told him the truth about what I found. I didn't play any games or anything. I said, you know what? I know that you cheated on me, and this is where I'm at. And at first he denied it, and then he seemingly got angry at me. I mean, I don't really know, but there was a little bit of a silence there for a while, if I remember correctly, during the day. And then eventually an email came across to me, because that was just kind of how we communicated our feelings, which was not the best way, but at least it was a way of communicating. And he agreed to go to therapy. And I found a therapist very quickly, and I just kind of chose the one that was closest, who seemed, to me anyway, like she would be the best. She mentioned on her website that she worked with gay couples, so I thought, well, that's a good sign. So he actually was the one that called her, set up the appointment, and then we started within a week, I believe, and the tale goes on from there. This is such an interesting story in my life, so I hope you'll stick around to learn more about it. Before I continue, I wanted to say that, you know, I'm summarizing an entire relationship that lasted for 6 years here into a very short chunk of a video, so I just want to put some context around this and make it aware that I can't possibly cover everything that happened in those 6 years. You obviously are only getting my perspective, you're not getting the other person's perspective, but if you know me, you know that I care about seeing both sides of things, so I will probably try to at least discuss their perspective from the way that I see it when I can. But really, this is about the therapy more than anything in my experience with therapy, so we'll see where this takes me. I really don't have this planned out or anything. We're just gonna talk and see where it goes. But we went into therapy. It was my first time in therapy since I was a teenager, and when I was a teenager, I was not in therapy voluntarily. My parents were divorcing. Actually, was I even a teenager? I don't think I was a teenager at that point. I was like in 11, 12, possibly 13 years old. I don't remember exactly when. Anyway, that was not a positive experience. I didn't want to be there, and basically I just didn't speak to the therapist. It was kind of stupid. And I kind of saw through it as this is a way for the judges to decide which parent I was going to go to. Like, it didn't feel like it was for me at all, so I just didn't participate. This was something that did feel like it was for me, so I participated, and so we started with this therapist. She was actually not too far from where we live, so it was good. We could actually walk there if we needed to. And she was friendly, and we did like the normal intake session. I was very nervous at the intake session. I mentioned to her I've been to therapists before and I did not have a great experience, so I tried to just make her aware of all of my reservations and be totally transparent with her about how I felt about what was going on, and we kind of walked from there, and I'll continue as we continue my little journey today. I look all like creepy here in the shadows, right? Let's see. So I was in therapy, and I was being as honest as I could in the first few sessions about what was going on. You know, I felt like my issue was that I had a lot of anxiety. And obviously we brought up right away, like, the reason that we were there was that my boyfriend cheated on me, my boyfriend at the time, and I'm sure he was honest about things. I don't remember him really saying much of anything, which was kind of a constant pattern when we both went to therapy. It always felt like I was the one who was speaking about things. Whenever he was asked about things, it felt like it was like, oh, things are okay, things are fine. He would talk about maybe work, stress at work, or maybe how that was impacting our relationship. Lights in my face. Okay. And I would bring up my issues around the cheating and stuff like that, but I'm just talking about the early days here. The early days, it it felt comfortable. It didn't feel like we dove in too far to things. And, you know, specifically in the beginning, she gave us dialogues. What do they call those? Couples dialogues, I think is the way that she called it, where when you were heading towards a conflict, when you felt a conflict, like what you should do. So the steps that she had given us were to, let's see if I can remember, and we practiced this many times, and one of my complaints was that it felt like he never was doing this, whereas I was making a conscious effort and trying constantly to do this with him, and I felt like he wasn't doing it back. And sometimes I would even say in the middle of our arguments, like, okay, I'm doing the dialogue thing, but you're not doing it back. But anyway, the idea of the dialogue was to kind of like communicate well and to de-escalate any tensions. So it would be, you say how you're feeling about something, like you air your grievances to the other person. Now the other person's supposed to say to you, I heard that you said, and then echo back everything that you said word for word. It doesn't have to be perfectly word for word, but the general idea is that you tell them what they just said, and then you say, did I get that right? And then that gives the first person the opportunity to say, yes, you did get that right, or no, there was something else, or you said, that's not what I meant to say, or like you get the chance to clarify. And then you just keep going with that first step. Did I get that right? Did I get that right? Until the answer is yes. Then once you've gotten it right, the second person then, the same person who just asked did I get that right, says, okay, I can understand how you would feel that way. Excuse me, not even that. You would say, it must feel blank. You must feel frustrated about this. You must feel angry. Maybe you feel happy. Maybe it's not even a conflict that you're talking about. Maybe you feel agonized, like it's agonizing for you. Maybe it feels disappointing. Like, use descriptive emotional words. And she wanted us to pick out 3. Then you say again, did I get that right? And the person has the option to clarify and say, like, yes, you did get that right, or no, I'm not really disappointed, I'm just angry. And then you go back and forth until the second person gets it right, and then you come in and say, well, I can understand how you would feel that way, and maybe give an example of why you can understand. And then you kind of say, is there anything else that you want to say? And it's all about the first person, the one who's bringing up the attention, bringing up the problem or bringing up the issue. They get all the attention, and you're just making sure you hear the issue correctly. That is like the first step in this whole thing. And empathizing and validating that person. So that was the basic tool that she kept trying to hammer home with us. And as far as me, I can say that I was trying to do it as often as I could. I know there were times when I would forget, and so would he. That's kind of normal when you're learning something. But I can speak for myself and say that I was definitely attempting to do that as often as I could whenever I felt that there was a conflict. But I didn't feel the same was coming back from him, and I brought that up with her many times, and yet it didn't seem like it was progressing. Like, she didn't seem to care that he wasn't doing it. I don't know. It was very weird to me. So that was like one clue that she wasn't the greatest therapist, but there's a very much more important clue that I should have paid attention to very early on that I'm going to get to. It's a new day, and I went back to the videos to make sure I could remember what we were talking about. So I was talking about how there was something that should have clued me into that my couples therapist was not great, and this was when my partner at the time had proposed to me, and he proposed to me, I believe it was a month and a half. I'd have to go look back again, but I believe it was a month and a half after I had found out that he had cheated on me, and we had just kind of gotten into therapy. So we were still relatively getting to know the therapist, and then he had proposed to me, and it was a very awkward proposal. It didn't feel right, and the therapist seemed surprised by the proposal, but she didn't seem to see it as unusual, and I think she really should have, because it was unusual. It's pretty unusual for somebody to propose a month and a half after you get into therapy. So that should, I should have been able to read that myself and realize that that was unusual, and I did. But at the same time, I was in the care of a professional, and that professional should have recognized that that wasn't normal behavior. So I'm going to think a little bit more about this, and we'll talk later. I just did the mental health breakdown. I'm getting a little bit better at it. So this is my 5th time, I believe, doing this. And it's not so easy. And I think this is kind of cool that I'm documenting it in a way, because it may show you, if you're somebody who maybe is more short-sighted, you have a hard time planning things, a hard time getting outside of your comfort zone. Maybe you have like anxiety issues, or I know for myself with PTSD, I had a hard time seeing ahead. I had a hard time like seeing the future and seeing where things were going. So I kind of like this idea of showing how this is going every week. But for me and the mental health breakdown, I was very anxious the first time I did it. And then I think you've seen, if you've been watching some of these videos, that it's been a source of stress throughout the week. But this week, I still resisted it today. I've learned about myself that I just do it all in one day. I can't plan ahead. I had this whole big plan when I started doing this of like, well, I'm going to look up some of the news during the week, and then I'm going to film halfway through the week, and then I'm going to look up more news during the week, and then film the rest at the end of the week. No, none of that actually happens. What I basically do is today, Sunday, I will get up and like do my normal routine of stuff that I do, and then I will sit down kind of like last minute with an hour or an hour and a half left and do all of the news research for what happened the week before, write it up in a little document, and then kiss the sky and hope that I can get it done fast enough that I can produce it and have it out for you the next day, tomorrow. So, which it won't be tomorrow by the time you're watching this, but Monday. And so far that seems to be working. It's still going to be stressful because even though I shoot all of this, I still have to go and find all the images and stuff, although this week it doesn't seem to be so intensive like it's been in previous weeks, so hopefully it won't be too bad. But I wanted to just give an example of how my anxiety level's going down as I'm learning, and I'm learning like how I operate, and I'm paying attention to like, okay, so I'm not somebody who breaks it up into pieces. I'm somebody who does it all at once. But that was a great source of frustration for me at first, because it was like, oh God, I have to do all of this. I have to do it all quickly. Once I accepted that that was the way that I was going to do things, like tonight, I realized like this is just the way it's going to be, and I'm not going to freak out about it. I'm not going to worry about it. I started last week or the week before, I started to realize like, even though I'm like hanging on at the last second, like, you know what, I'm going to eat something. I'm going to take 5 minutes and I'm going to eat something before I go to do this. And my stress is down because I'm not hungry. I'm not feeling like I can't breathe, or like I'm at my wit's end, because I'm taking care of myself in preparation for doing it, and I'm allowing it to be more of a fun exploratory process rather than this big source of stress that it has been. So I'm happy for myself that I'm seeing this change, and I'm hoping that if you can see this change in me, it gives you some hope for yourself. For example, one of the major areas that people with mental disorders in particular have difficulty with is occupational things. And I think one of the big fears behind that is, I can't do this. I've never been capable of doing this. I'm never going to be able to do this. And not to say that just because I'm doing something here means that you can, but I'm hoping you'll at least see that maybe it's a possibility for you. That I was really stressed out when I started doing this, and now it's like it's going down every week as I practice and I practice. It's getting a little bit easier. So I wanted to hopefully be some kind of an example of inspiration for you.
Hey everyone, it's a new day and I am sick and it's incredibly windy out here today, so we're going to try to do the best we can with my voice and with the wind, but I want to continue on our discussion of couples therapy. I have a lot to say, and let's get to it. I think I found a spot that's kind of out of the way of the wind. Hopefully you'll be able to hear me okay. I'll try to keep the microphone a little closer to me today. So I wanted to give a little shout out because I got another Patreon patron and I appreciate it. So thank you. You know who you are. It was only one, so it was you. So hello, thank you. For those that don't know, if you want to support my videos, I'm up on Patreon. It's a place where you can support me financially, and you get like extras, bonuses, bloopers, and all that kind of stuff. Just another way to interact with me if you enjoy what I'm doing and you like what I'm doing here. Of course, I'm always going to do it free anyway, so if you can't support, totally fine. But it's an option and it helps me, so thank you. Thank you to my new patron, and thank you to my other patron, and hopefully the many more to come. Alright, so I wanted to talk about couples therapy more, and I wanted to first say, hopefully this doesn't become such a big topic that I have to do a two-parter, but it may, we'll see. Secondly, it's really tempting when you're talking about couples therapy to get into the details of the relationship, and I don't want to go there because I want the focus to be on the therapy, because I don't think it's really so relevant to you, the details right now. Maybe it will be at a later point, but for now I really want to just focus on what couples therapy was like for me, so that's what I'm going to try to do. So I was talking about how my ex had proposed to me, and the therapist didn't seem to think that was so unusual. She thought it was unusual like that day, but she never really dug into like what was going on. She never addressed it, and that was weird. It was weird because, as I mentioned, he had just cheated on me, and that was the reason why we just got into therapy, and then he went and proposed to me, and that's not a normal behavior. That's unusual. So if that's happening in your life, let me just say to you, that is unusual. That's not normal. That was one clue that she wasn't a great therapist, and I'm going to continue talking about why she wasn't a great therapist and what my experience is with her, because I think it's important for us to realize what that's like, what it's like to have a bad therapist. In particular, she was a couples therapist in this case, so that we know when we go into therapy what to be looking for, what kind of questions to be asking. And then I'm going to talk later on about a second couples therapist that we saw that was a little bit better, so you can have a more positive view and not feel like therapy is just a bunch of crap. So let's keep going. Alright, I'm gonna speak loudly and hope the wind doesn't bother us too much here. So, alright. So, that was the first hint that something was wrong. She thought that... She didn't seem to think there was anything wrong with him proposing to me a month after cheating on me and just getting into therapy. That was kind of weird. But she had us do those exercises, and they helped a little bit, but not really, because he wasn't really doing them. So, what else happened? You know, we were with her for a few years, and during that time, at some point, I got the feeling that I was always the person who was the one with the problem. Like, she never seemed to address his issues, and I saw issues in him, and I'm sure he saw issues in me, so whatever, but I always noticed that it came back to me and my anxiety, because I was the one who was always bringing up issues. He never seemed to bring up issues. He never seemed to have a problem with the way things were going, and yet he would be giving me the silent treatment, and I'm bringing you closer because of the wind. He would give me the silent treatment. He would be distant. He wasn't being affectionate with me. Little did I know, but I found out later, he was talking crap about me behind my back to people. So as far as she could tell, he didn't have a problem, but I was the one always bringing up problems, and I knew that I had anxiety because I had freely admitted it to her. And so I became what they call the identified patient, which is a bad thing usually, because the identified patient means that you're the person that's getting treated. And when it's couples therapy, there's never one person who has the entire problem, because a couple is supposed to work as a unit together. So it seemed like I became the identified patient, and it was always about me and my problems and how I needed to fix my anxiety. Eventually, at one point, she started telling me how I needed to, like, when am I going to move on from the cheating almost? She didn't say it that way, but it was implied in the way that we were talking about things. Like, when are you going to move on? When, like, at some point you have to forgive. And I was thinking, like, okay, but we never processed it. Like, what the hell? Alright, I found a very unusual place to continue talking, but it seems like it's out of the wind, so let's see how this works. Okay, so I was the identified patient, and she kept pushing this. She kept trying to, like, fix me, so to speak. So that made me start to feel crazy, because I kept bringing up to her, I'm like, well, what about when he does this? And what about, like, why do we keep having this issue? And it seems to revolve around him giving me the silent treatment, or him not doing the homework that you give us. And she would turn it back around on me, and I'm like, what's going on here? I don't understand. Like, I feel like I'm thinking pretty clearly, but she's not seeing it, and it was getting very frustrating. So eventually, like a year and a half into the therapy, I confronted her, and I said, you know, not like confrontationally, it was very calm, but I said to her, you know, and actually I discussed this with my partner at the time before I even brought it up, because I wanted to see how he felt about it. But I brought it up with her. I said, you know, I feel like we're not actually progressing. We keep winding up at the same spot. We keep having the same problems over and over again. And her reaction to that was to get defensive. And she pulled out her folder, and she was like, well, we are progressing. Here, let me show you. Didn't you have a problem with this? And you don't have a problem with this anymore? And I was just kind of like listening to her, and I was like, this is so weird. Like, what therapist gets defensive when I bring up that I feel like we're not progressing? Like, she's not listening to me. She's trying to prove that she did a job, and I'm like, this just doesn't feel right. And even the things she was saying that we progressed on, I'm like, okay, sure, we progressed on them, I guess, but that doesn't mean we're having a healthy, happy relationship. Something's not right here. So, you know, I kept getting these hints that this therapy wasn't working, that it wasn't right, that it was a bad therapist. And I kept ignoring them, because I thought, well, if I have to go to another therapist, then I'm going to have to go through that whole intake period of explaining things again, and we've already got so much history with this one. So I felt very trapped, and I was trying to put all my faith into this therapist, even though I didn't have a lot of faith in her. And unfortunately, things went south, and a couple of years later, when we had a big problem in our relationship, he was the one who would usually schedule the sessions, and he just stopped scheduling. So now we're on like year 5 of our relationship approximately, and actually I think we were going, like year 5, 5.5, and we stopped going to her because we had a big major argument. And before I get to that though, there was one point at which she, just to like cap off like why this is not a good therapist and things that you should look for when you're looking for your own couples therapist, if that's something you're interested in. She had, at one point, we had an argument, and he brought up that he felt like he didn't want to have a relationship anymore, and so she started talking as if we were breaking up. And she like started like really getting into it, like, okay, well, we're gonna have to discuss this, and we're gonna have to discuss that, and blah blah blah. So I let her like keep going, and I'm getting really upset as she's talking, and then I realized, like, what the I constantly had this feeling with this therapist of like, what the hell is going on here? So I let her finish talking, because that's how I was. To me, that's just polite. And I said to her, well, I don't really want to break up, because she was asking me how I felt about something she was talking about. I said, well, I never really said I wanted to break up. And she's like, oh. And then from there, we started to discuss the possibility of not breaking up, and then we decided not to. But like, why did she just assume that we were? It was very, it didn't feel right. So, okay, we're 5.5 years in or so, and she's out of the picture now because my ex didn't call her, and we just never set up an appointment. So at some point I said he wanted to break up again. We weren't seeing anybody, and he decided, okay, I want to break up again. I said, well, I want to see another therapist. I feel like we didn't give it enough of a shot. I don't feel like that therapist was doing a good job, so let's see somebody else. So I found somebody else. We started seeing her, and I thought we were like giving it another shot. That's every impression that he gave to me, is that we were giving it another shot. So she wanted to see us separately, which I liked. So she saw each of us separately well, she saw us together the first session. Then she saw each of us separately for like 2 more sessions. And then it came down to that we came together to talk, and either that session or the next session that we came together to talk, he said, like, I'm done, I want to break up. And it made no sense because there was no problems going on. It felt like things were getting better, and this was a constant thing in this relationship where it felt like things were getting better, and then all of a sudden he wanted to break up. So she asked me how I felt about that, and it was like the end of a session, and it did not feel good, obviously. So what I will say, though, is up until that point, she started talking about trauma. And I mentioned this in one of my other vlogs, that she started saying the word trauma, and at first I was like, I don't know why she's bringing this word up. Like, I haven't been in war, I haven't, like, okay, I've had some childhood stuff, but, like, I'm an adult now, so what does trauma have to do with anything? That's a long time ago. But she kept saying it, and I kept tossing it around in my head, and I started to, like, look it up online and see, like, what is she talking about? And I realized, like, oh, wow, wait a minute, this could totally be what's going on here, because I had childhood issues. I don't know about him, but I feel like he may have had some childhood issues too, although he may not recognize that. And he also had a specific event in his life that should have been traumatizing. It doesn't mean it had to be, because everybody deals with traumatizing events differently, and some people don't wind up to develop symptoms. But I have a feeling it was a major event in his life that wasn't processed. Anyway, again, not to get to my specifics of this relationship, but this was an indication that she was a better therapist, because she recognized that it was trauma, and not only did she recognize that it was trauma, once we started talking further about this and how we were going to break up and all this, I didn't even want to think about it, she started saying, like, well, I don't know that I can handle this. Like, this is a little bit too much for me as a therapist. And she started talking about me specifically seeing a separate therapist, because I was the one who was having anxiety and having issues about this whole breakup. My ex was very calm and cool and collected, or at least he appeared to be. So she wanted to refer me out to somebody else to go for individual counseling, and I was reluctant because of financial reasons, but we started to work that out, and I went to see somebody else. And I'm going to see if I can find another place to keep talking about this. If not, it's maybe a two-parter. I like the lighting here. This is a good little spot. I don't know if I can always come here though, because this is a place where it could totally be construed that I'm loitering. Okay, so I liked this therapist, the couples therapist in particular. She's the one who sent me to an individual therapist for a short period, because she recognized that it was trauma going on, and in doing so, she really gave me the key to changing a lot in my life, because I was suffering from PTSD. I learned about what dissociation was from reading about PTSD, which was something I had been doing my entire life and not even realizing it, and wow, what a changer that was to learn what dissociation was and to be able to learn to work on it and manage it. But as far as being a couple went, whenever I went to her, you know, she didn't, like, it never felt like she was taking a side, and part of that may have been because we had individual sessions with her as well as together sessions. When I brought up my concerns, it never felt like she was, like, trying to tell me that they weren't concerns or that I shouldn't be worried about them. And the same went for him. You know, you could say that maybe she turned around and took my side, but I did not get that feeling at all. I really felt like she listened to both of us. especially because he kept insisting he wanted to break up, and she kept pushing to me like he wants to break up. So she spoke for him. She advocated for him as much as she advocated for me. It never felt like he was uneven. So she helped us through that breakup process. You know, she listened to me in saying that that's not what I wanted. I brought up the idea of discernment counseling, which she had never heard of, but she was willing to listen to me when I brought things to her. And I said, you know, discernment counseling is like a short period where you try to decide whether or not something can be worked out. It's kind of like this idea, I forget who came up with it, so you'll have to look it up, but it's this idea of couples who are going through a hard time having like a short 8-week or something therapy period, you know, 8 sessions, I think it was 8 to 12 sessions, to decide whether or not it was worth to continue on and try to repair the relationship. So I thought that was a good idea in our case, but my ex wasn't really having it, and she really felt like I needed to work on my own stuff, which I was, and I changed since then. So I am grateful for her pointing that stuff out to me. But ultimately, it came down to the fact that he didn't want to save the relationship. He for whatever reason, I have my suspicions about the reasons, but he didn't care to be involved in this relationship. And he kept trying to break it up throughout the years. There was a constant back and forth thing, which is not a healthy relationship. And I thought that going into therapy was going to help things, but ultimately he didn't want to work on it. So therapy can only do so much. You need both people in the relationship to work on things. You know, I worked on whatever I was able to work on, and that was something the second therapist actually mentioned to me, like, somebody has to change, somebody has to make a difference. So he was complaining about not getting enough physical affection, and I was saying I was having difficulty with that because he cheated on me, which he actually cheated on me a second time before we got to the second therapist. And I was, you know, saying like, well, how can I be physically affectionate? Like, I had issues in childhood with physical stuff, and now I have this person who's cheated on me twice. And she was like saying, you know, I know that's a difficult place to be in, but this is a core area of his that he's having difficulty with. So I changed, and I started to be more physically affectionate, but it didn't change anything for him. So the therapist can only do so much, and it's up to one or both people to change. Ideally, you want both people to change. Sometimes, and this is what she was coaching me through, sometimes when one person changes, that inspires the other person to start changing. That didn't happen in my case, because I was changing and he just wasn't having it. So, in my opinion, he wasn't ready to face himself and his issues, because he then went on 3 months after we broke up to find a new person who he is currently with. We don't have to get into detail. I just don't think that he is ready to face the difficulties in his life, so they show up in relationship. And unfortunately, you know, I'll say this, if you're somebody who's like him, who has a hard time opening up, who avoids things, you're going to have difficulty in no matter what relationship you show up in, because it's going to keep coming up. You know, I had my own issues that I brought into this relationship that kept coming up until that couples therapist mentioned trauma, and I started looking into PTSD and looking into dissociation, and then I changed them. Unfortunately, by the time I changed them, my ex's foot was already out the door. So, you know, I sometimes wonder, though I don't really care anymore, to be quite honest, but sometimes I wonder if that first therapist was as savvy and educated as the second therapist, would we have had been able to save the relationship? And I'll never know that answer. But my caution to you is, if you decide to go down the route of couples therapy, make sure your therapist is good. Make sure they listen to both of you. Make sure there's no side taking. Make sure if you feel like there is side taking, you bring it up. And, you know, you have to take an active role in that therapy, which unfortunately that therapist never explained that to me or my partner. So I just kind of blindly put my trust in her. You know, you think that you just hire somebody to help you and then they're going to guide you through. You know, kind of like when you go to see a doctor, you figure the doctor is going to know what to do, but that's not the case. Especially in therapy, there's a lot of people who are practicing therapies that aren't even validated, that aren't true, because there's no requirement. There's no, in the United States of America anyway, there's no federal requirement that says you have to practice a therapy that's been validated. So there's a lot of crap therapists out there. So that's been my experience with couples therapy. I do think couples therapy is very useful. It's just, it needs the right ingredients. It needs a good therapist. You need to be open to talking about things and changing. Your partner needs to be at least somewhat open to talking about things and changing. You know, like I said, sometimes you can change things about yourself and that inspires your partner to change. Not always going to be the case. So don't put yourself through the pain of investing in your partner being the one to change. You cannot make somebody else change. I worked on myself. I changed myself. It still wasn't enough. He did not change. So my point is, you're going to get the most benefit out of helping yourself. And this was something that the second couples therapist kind of hammered home to me. Even if the relationship doesn't work out, if I worked on my own stuff, I was still going to walk away a better person, better able to deal with life. And that was an important lesson for me. So I want to hear from you. Have you been to couples therapy yourself? Have you been thinking about getting into couples therapy? What has your experience been like? Maybe you're a couples therapist. What is your thoughts on everything that I said? Maybe you're my old therapist. That would be weird, but if you want to comment, go ahead and comment and we can have a discussion about that. But let's talk about this, because I think a lot of people, I know for myself, like, I didn't know that I wanted to go into couples therapy, but I felt like there was no other choice, so that's why I did it. So I think there's probably a lot of you out there who are hesitating, not really sure of what to do, so let's talk about it below and maybe we can help you make a decision.